And then you have this sort of secondary issue, which is that central banks sort of had a bias anyway, which is that, we created these central banks out of sort of neoliberalism. They would always tend to err on the side of capital over labor. So we had this sort of 30, 40-year period where the central banks deliberately run their economies quite cool. And as soon as it looked like wages were starting to pick up, they would then panic and cut the cycle short. And it's usually in that sort of late part of the cycle when inequality starts to narrow, when wages start to pick up. And so part of this stuff, when the Fed changed its employment mandate, started talking about inclusivity, which is obviously the big thing that everyone's picked up on recently, the big
Yeah.
criticism. I think it was about trying to offset what was already there in terms of a political bias. And the fact that all of these central banks, they sort of grew up in the sort of framework of Milton Friedman. I mean, that is a deeply political view. The Nehru is effectively quite a political concept. And so, I think part of this was just a reaction to a bias that was already there.
Yeah, Freya, anything to add on this?
I guess like there's a distinction between central banks researching big trends, as Dario was talking about, and understanding how that affects their mandate. And then there's definitely a line, I think more so in terms of climate change, where, if they're actually trying to enact some kind of a policy, then for me, that's sort of overstepping the mark because that's a political issue that needs to be, probably isn't being, but needs to be dealt with in the political realm, the overtly political
Hmm.
realm. So I think certainly, like, of course, the central bank needs to understand how climate change is going to affect its mandate.